All right, joining us on this discussion is Aviation Consultant Sean Mendis. You're welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so Nigeria is facing a pretty much new turbulence where we have security operators within the airports asking for money from passengers. What do you think about the situation? What do you make of it?
This is not anything new. I've been traveling to Nigeria myself for over 20 years, and I remember my first trip back in 2005, and, a guy immediately came out of nowhere to help me with my luggage, and he was like, Oga, you have something small to dash me. And, that kind of culture has been around, as long as I can remember it, and I'm sure even long before that. So, it's something that is part of the culture in terms of the airport operations there. There are people who have worked their entire careers depending on this, and it becomes a challenge because obviously it's not something that is officially sanctioned, but it's something that's become so heavily rooted in the way airports operate in Nigeria that it's going to be very difficult to actually eradicate it or, find a way to at least minimize its impact on travelers.
All right, so I would like you to bring your attention to something that has become almost culturally normal in Nigeria, and that's the something for the boys culture. Now, from security desks to boarding gates, many travelers have reported subtle and not so subtle demands for cash or gifts. Now, is this culture of something for the boys simply old habits that have refused to die, or a symptom of something deeper within the system?
I think it's a bit of both. As I mentioned, there are people who came into working at their jobs, 20, 30 years ago when Nigerian airports weren't as well run and structured as they are now. Not to say that they're perfectly done right now, but they are significantly better than they used to be. And the system has not necessarily changed significantly. Certainly there have been changes at policy level, there have been changes in ministers and heads of FAN and so forth, but the guys who are actually doing the job on the ground, the check-in agents, the security agents, stuff like that has not really changed. And I think that is really where any attempt to change the culture is going to have to start from the bottom, and no matter how much the people at the top want to make it a top-down change, it'll take a long time for that to trickle down to the people who are actually the ones soliciting these something smalls.
All right, so some have argued that the problem isn't just a few bad eggs, because that could be the argument. There are a few bad eggs, but, some say that it's beyond that. But culture has tolerated it across agencies. Now, should we be looking at this as individual misconduct or a systemic failure of supervision and accountability?
I definitely think individual misconduct is the start of it, because no matter whether there is good supervision and accountability, if a person chooses to do this, they're making a personal choice, to violate what is obviously a very clear policy from their employer, whether that's immigration or customs or security or an airline or an handling agent or whatever else. The accountability, though, is actually there. And, it reminds me of something many years ago, probably about 2008 or so, where I had a captain from my airline who was trying to check in for a flight in Lagos. And he was, he was a European captain. He was very flustered because they said, Captain has nothing for my Christmas. And he called me, and he put me on the phone with the check-in agent, and the check-in agent was like, oh, can Captain give me something small? And I was, if you play it back at them and you hold accountability, and I'm like, sure, we can give you something small. But I also know your boss, and I'll tell your boss that I gave you something small, so when he gives you the Christmas bonus, he can take that something small out of it. And immediately the whole thing changed. I was like, no, God, no, I was just asking. It's okay, Captain, my VIP today, and so forth. So sometimes dangling that accountability and the fear of that accountability is something that could actually, help people's individual misconduct to go away or at least reduce.
Meant to be high security zones, yet these unprofessional interactions happen right under official watch. Now, what does this say about enforcement? And does it raise the question about broader lapses in airport security?
Enforcement of something like this is pretty hard when it's the people who are supposed to be in charge of the enforcement who are the biggest violators themselves. I mean, if you were to go and flag down a security or a police officer and say that this porter is asking me for 1,000 naira more than he should be, the guy will laugh at your face and say, give me the 1,000 naira. So, it is the part of this cultural problem at the airports that this tip culture, or the general perception that people who are traveling have lots of spare money in their pockets, that maybe they can dash me something small. That is really the root. So yeah, certainly it is a question, because if he's willing to help you with your bag for 1,000 naira, what's he willing to do for, say, 100,000 naira or even more?
All right, so coming back to what you just said, with supervisors being the biggest violators of this rule. Now, how do you say Nigerians should protect themselves from these type of situations?
I think the main thing is to have a good attitude. If you take a confrontational attitude with someone, they're going to, come back at you with exercising the power that they have. So, if you start arguing with the guy who says you have something small for me, I usually just joke and say, oh, what's something small? I had to, my wife took all my money before I went. You think she lets me travel with cash? And they'll all laugh and, something like that. So I think it's about, understanding that this is sometimes a little bit of a pantomime that both sides have to go through. I can honestly say that traveling to Nigeria, elsewhere in Africa, this is not unique to Nigeria. It happens elsewhere in Africa. It happens in all developing countries. I've never actually been shaken down to a point where somebody has extracted money from me that I was not willing to part with. So an attitude, the ability to politely treat him as a human being, or treat her as a human being, because it's not just the men who do this. I mean, the women are just as bad as the men when it comes to soliciting this, but to just treat them as a human being, joke around with it, make them feel appreciated in their role, and often they will just smile and let you go once you've firmly said that you're not going to do anything.
All right, but would you dub this as a flawed mentality for some of the workers? Because going to the airport should be a get in, get out type of situation.
Oh, absolutely. And, they're in professional roles, but they're not acting like professionals. And that is a serious lapse in the culture of Nigerian aviation. And it's not just true from airport workers. It's something that's true in many sectors in Nigeria. I mean, if you're trying to get assistance from any government office, you're trying to get assistance from public utilities or things like that, the same culture of you dash me something small and I'll do your job faster, or I'll do your job better, or you'll get priority or something else, is always going to happen. I mean, I went to Airtel to get a new SIM card a few months ago, and once again it was, oh guy, you want to come to the front, you dash me something small, I'll put you at the front of the line, and so forth. So this is not unique to airports. It's just that in airports it's a much higher stake environment, because as you said, it is a high security zone. This is somewhere which serves as the gateway to Nigeria for foreign investors, for tourists, and the gateway out of Nigeria for Nigerian business people, tourists, and so forth leaving the country. So that really is, it's part of the national ethos, which probably needs to be revised.
All right, so for many visitors, the airport is their very first taste of Nigeria and their last on the way out. Now, how damaging is this behavior to the country's image, especially for tourism and business travel?
Extremely damaging. And honestly, that is why tourism in Nigeria, not the only reason, but one of the many reasons why tourism in Nigeria has not taken off like it should, because there is a reputation, for better or worse, that the airports in Nigeria are a lawless zone. And, again, I go back 30 years, and if you ever flew in the United States in the 1990s, one thing that you'll always remember is that every single security checkpoint, there was a sign saying that Murtala Mohammed International Airport in Lagos does not meet international security standards, and any passengers coming from that are subject to rescreening and so forth. So immediately, there is that perception, that legacy perception, that Nigerian airports are tricky. And if a tourist were to choose to say, all right, things must have changed and I'm coming here right now, and the first thing they get is, they're flustered, they've come off a long flight, it's hot, the air conditioning may not be working, they've got heavy bags, they've got to figure out, that the signage may be wrong. There's a lot of challenges at airports anywhere in the world, and, Nigerian airports are no different. And then to have somebody try to hassle them for money really spoils your experience immediately. And I think that is something that really has affected tourism. I think business To a slightly lesser extent. I mean, most of my trips to Nigeria are for business, and consequently, when I come in, I'm largely used to dealing with this over the last many years. But I can definitely see why it is a hurdle. It's not an insurmountable hurdle, but it is definitely something that has affected Nigeria's ability to pull its weight in terms of inbound travel from foreign passengers.
All right, so looking at the traveler experience still, now for most travelers, they say they feel powerless to complain, fearing delays, embarrassment, or even retaliation. Now, why is it so hard for passengers to report this behavior? And are there any clear channels in Nigeria to safely do so?
I think passengers are right, because sometimes when you are confronted at the airport, you don't quite know who the person in charge of the syndicate that's running the the dash me something is. You can go to the security guard over there, but he may be the boss of the guy over there, and he's getting a cut of every small thing you give. So my recommendation to most passengers is play along. As I said earlier, try and be friendly and talk your way out of it. If you still have to wind up paying something, definitely take note of who you've paid it to, the time, the location, and things like that. But don't confront them on the spot. That is going to expose you potentially to retaliation. It is potentially going to escalate a situation, and you never want to do that at an airport. Airport is a high-stress zone to begin with, and any sort of escalation of the situation is never going to end well, whether for you or for someone else. But ensure that you get the details of who is the person who extorted the money, get their name, get the location, get as much information as you can. And then after the fact, send an email, contact them by phone or whatever else. The people at the top are definitely intent on stamping this out. So giving them examples where they can make, a case that, look, we have seen that passengers are complaining that you are extorting them at the x-ray machine or at the check-in desk or wherever else. If they're able to get that information to the top managers, to the ministry even, that's the kind of thing which will at least serve as a deterrent when a few people face consequences.
All right, so I'd like you to move your focus towards airport staff and a monthly take-home. Now, some airport staff quietly admit low wages push them towards informal tips as a survival strategy. Now, to what extent is this about moral failure versus economic desperation among poorly paid workers?
I'll be perfectly honest. While a lot of airport workers in Nigeria aren't very well paid, they are definitely better paid than probably 90% of the Nigerian workforce. So if you can be honest as a, as a delivery driver, or you can be honest as, in any of the millions of other roles in Nigeria, there's absolutely no reason why you as a better paid employee with a solid job at the airport cannot be honest. So definitely there is a moral failure there. And I mean, it's not untrue that that everybody probably wants to be paid better in jobs at the airport. Those are very competitive jobs. There's usually hundreds of applicants for every position out there. But once you've taken on a position of responsibility, and every single worker at an airport goes through security training, they know what their role is in security, what their role is as ambassadors for the country facing the tourists and so forth. They are making an active choice that, having accepted that job, having accepted the responsibilities, that they're still choosing to engage in this kind of behavior. And that definitely is more of a moral failing than it is a systemic one.
Airports like in Ghana, Kenya, that have basically created a very smooth system. Now, what do you think Nigeria should be learning from these other airports?
I disagree in terms that comparing Ghana and Kenya in particular is much different. I just had this conversation last week with some friends in Ghana where they were complaining about the same sort of hassles that one faces at Accra airport when one arrives, and how it is such a problem for tourists, and customs will stop you, and there are people there with ID cards but you don't know where they're from, and they're all like, you need to pay me this because you're bringing this in. So it's not unique. I mean, Nigeria's got its own set of problems, but Ghana and Kenya, I mean, Kenya has also been quite in the news locally over there in terms of customs harassing people. And the moment you walk out of arrivals at Nairobi airport, there's a million taxi drivers all trying to get you to come. Some legitimate, some less legitimate. So I don't think this is unique. I think Nigeria has its own set of culture over there, but every developing country, whether in Africa, you see this in India, you see this in the Philippines, you see this in Latin America, anywhere where there is a developing country and where there is a developing economy, we'll see people who are hustling. And, sometimes that is legitimate hustling, and sometimes that hustling is, okay, we see a soft touch in terms of of a new arrival to the country who might be able to part with more money than he's worth. And, I think the most glaring example of this, actually, I experienced was in Poland, where just after they joined the EU, so it must have been 2004 or so, and I arrived at Warsaw Airport, and the taxi driver was trying to tell me that his taxi meter was calibrated in euros rather than in Polish zloty, which was about, I think, 3 times higher at the time. And I was aware enough to say, no, you're wrong, and he laughed, and he was like, okay, then pay me zloty. But another tourist might have been scammed by that in the first place. So, it's different in different countries, but it's not something that is unique to Nigeria, and definitely something that Ghana and Kenya in particular are not immune from.
All right, thank you very much. That's all the time we have. That was Sean Mendis, Aviation Consultant. Thank you.